Shalom, and welcome to V'ahavta Yisrael, a Hebrew phrase which means you shall love Israel. We hope you'll stay with us for the next 30 minutes as our teacher, Dr. Baruch, shares his expository teaching from the Bible. Dr. Baruch is the senior lecturer at the Zera Avraham Institute based in Israel. Although all courses are taught in Hebrew at the Institute, Dr. Baruch is pleased to share this weekly address in English. To find out more about our work in Israel, please visit us on the web at LoveIsrael.org. That's one word, LoveIsrael.org. Now, here's Baruch with today's lesson.
We are called to have a generous spirit, and that means to give generously to others. Those who are in need, those who are having problems, those who simply are in a time in their life where they're struggling, that we're supposed to step in and bless them. And likewise, we're going to see that there is also a proper desire to simply give to God. Not just to His work, but to give unto Him, to lay it down and trust that God is going to use that according to His purposes. Now, we began last week the last chapter of the book of Leviticus, chapter 27. And we saw there about a vow. Now, I want to remind us that Yeshua says it's not good to take oaths and make vows, but simply let your yes be yes and your no, no. But what we're talking about this week and what we alluded to last week in the passage of Scripture that we studied had to do with making a vow specifically in regard to giving. And we need to realize that when one, and this is not an obligation, this would be more of a free will offering, that you are moved from within, hopefully by the Spirit of God within you, but you're moved from within. It's not mandated, you're not commanded, but you freely choose to say, I want to give this unto God. And with the understanding, it is going to be used for His purposes. That those who are in leadership in this day, the priests, the Levites, those who were in charge of first the tabernacle and then the temple, that they will utilize this money. That is sacred money, sacred in its value, that they will utilize it appropriately. Because this type of gift is very important to God. We're going to see that God speaks of this type of giving, this source of generosity that comes from within a man or a woman. He calls it the Holy of Holies. Quite an important term. Well, look with me to where we left off last week, the book of Leviticus, chapter 27, and I want us to begin in verse 16. Leviticus chapter 27, beginning in verse 16, where we read, and if from a field of his possession. So we're talking about an individual. In a moment, he'll use the term man. So this individual, he wants to do something from a field of his possession. Now, this one, he may have numerous fields, but he is speaking about one in particular that belongs to him, that's part of his estate that he owns. He wants to do something with it. And notice what it says, again, verse 16, as we continue. A man, and we could say, dedicates it or sanctifies it is another way to say it. In this word for dedication or sanctifying, in this word is a word holy. So he's taking something that in and of itself, it's not holy. But when he makes this desire to sanctify it, to make it holy, to dedicate it, that act gives it a new and a greater significance, a new status and a greater status. And we'll talk about that and how to understand it in a moment. Again, verse 16. And if from the field of his possession a man sets it apart unto the Lord, notice, unto the Lord for God's purposes, it shall be your evaluation. So you have to have an evaluation. What is the worth of this? Because this field is being dedicated unto the Lord. What does that mean? It means the value of that field must be given to the temple, must be given to the work of God. And therefore, when we read in this passage, look again at verse 16, it says, it shall come about your evaluation according to its seed. What does that mean? Its seed. Well, you look at the field. Each field's going to have a different dimension, different size. And you will know, the one who works that field is going to know how much seed is necessary to sow the entire field. And then he tells us, look on, there's going to be an evaluation. The evaluation is the seed is going to have a value of a homer of barley. Now, homer is a weight. So we see here that the homer of barley is going to be valued at 50 shekels of silver. So this is kind of the root price, the index. A homer of barley is 50 shekels. And of course, we'll see in a moment, just like we saw last week, that we're dealing with the holy shekel, the one that is attested to and used in the temple, or before that in the tabernacle. So this is the evaluation. So you look at a field, you find out how much seed that it requires. And you say it requires whatever it might be, and you find out what is the worth of seed if a homer of barley is 50 shekels of silver. You do whatever the index is for figuring out the worth of the field by how much barley seed would it take to sow this field. And however many homers you have, let's say you have 10 homers of barley seed required to sow this feed, then obviously it would be 10 times 50 or 500 shekels of silver. So this is how you figure out what the person who is sanctifying this field unto the Lord, what he is required to pay. Verse 17. And if from the year of Jubilee he sets apart, he sanctifies, he dedicates his field, it says, as the evaluation, it stands. Now, this is something a little bit different. We see here, look at the first part, if from the year of Jubilee. So we see that he's speaking about dedicating it specifically. On when? Well, it says here, if from the year of Jubilee is when he's going to dedicate it, then its value, its normal value stands, whatever it is normally sold for. And of course, we get that from what he's saying here about this index that we alluded to. But look at verse 18. But if after the Jubilee, he sanctifies, he sets apart, he dedicates his field, then we have a different way to evaluate what he's going to be giving. It says the priest will calculate for him the silver by means of the years that remain until the year of Jubilee. So we find out how many years are left to Jubilee. And we find that this has to do with the calculation. Why? Well, we know something. We know that in the year of Jubilee, that land can't be used. It goes back to the owner, the original owner, but no one touches it. And therefore, in order to figure out the price, you go and you find out how many years are left. And then you go to that original index and deduct that, the worth of that land, what you can profit from it each year. So let's say that you can profit, we'll just say 100 shekels. And there's 10 years left till Jubilee. You have 1,000 shekels. You go back to that index and you deduct 1,000 shekels from what the cost would be, the valuation of that land. That's what he's telling us that we do in this case. Verse 19. But if one will redeem the field, the one who is sanctifying it, dedicating it, what does he want to do? He wants to redeem it for some other reason. He doesn't want to give that particular field. So what does he do? Well, he's going to have to give the evaluation of that field, plus it says, and he will add 20% of silver, 20% more than its normal evaluation. And then when he does that, it says, Vekam lo, it will be established for him, meaning that field will be his once more. If he changes and says, I don't want to give this field anymore, he gives the value. But that change is going to, and we saw this last week, is going to cost him, as redemption normally does, a fifth, meaning 20%, a penalty of a fifth or 20% of the value. Verse 20. But if he will not redeem the field, or if he sold the field to another man, so if he doesn't redeem it or he sells it, it says it cannot be redeemed anymore. So in this case, if he says, I don't want to redeem it, and he had sold it to someone else, it can't be redeemed. He's going to have to make another type of action. It says in verse 21, and it shall come about the field that goes out in Jubilee. So now we see that it's the Jubilee year. And he's dedicating, and it says, holy to the Lord as a field that is, and we have the word maybe devoted. This is the word harem. Now, what is harem? Harem is, you'll recall, that when the children of Israel many times went to war, God said, you have to destroy everything. You don't benefit from any of the spoils of war. And you put together or put to death all the people, everyone must die. Well, that's called a harem. So here he's saying this, look again at the text. And it shall come about that the field should go forth in Jubilee. It's holy unto the Lord as a field that is totally devoted to the Lord. And what does that mean? That year, it belongs to the priests, his possession. Meaning he can't do anything with it. It's no longer his. It goes back to him. But in this case, it is the priest's asset, not his. And he cannot benefit from it in any way. He can't make an agreement on it. He can't say, I want to sell it to someone else. It'll take effect later, but I'll get the money now. Nothing can be done with that field that is going forth in Jubilee, meaning it's available in Jubilee, or it's been devoted unto the Lord. In both of these cases, it belongs at that time to the priests, not to the individual. Verse 22. And if the field from the one who bought it, which is not a field of his possession, he sanctifies unto the Lord. So now we have a field that isn't part of his possession in the sense of that estate that was given by being part of a tribe, that inheritance, that special inheritance. So this is not part. What is being sold, or in this case, what is offered up to be purchased, is literally what it says. It is not a field from his possession. But he wants to, nevertheless, that field, he wants to dedicate, he wants to sanctify, set apart unto the Lord. What then? Look at verse 23. The priest shall calculate for him the price of the evaluation, of your evaluation, until the year of Jubilee. And then it says, and it shall be this evaluation in that day, and it shall be holy unto the Lord, meaning this. He makes this decision to do this generous act with a field that's not restricted by the laws. We remember that it's forbidden to sell your inheritance. But this is part not of his inheritance. He's acquired it later on. Therefore, he's free to sell it. But if this is what he's selling, notice what he says. That it's going to have a price that the priest calculates for him. And the price of your evaluation is until the year of Jubilee. Why? It's going to go back to him. Even though it is not part of that inheritance, all purchases go back in the year of Jubilee. So the evaluation is going to be how many years are to the year of Jubilee? What is the profit of a field in a given year? And however many years are remain until Jubilee, this is how it's calculated, the scripture is saying. Verse 24. In the year of Jubilee, now he's telling us just what I said. In the year of Jubilee, it says, the field will return. And then it speaks about the one who purchased it from him. So the one who purchased it, it's going to return from him and is going to go to the other one. Who's the other one? This possession of the land, the one who possessed this land originally. It's going to go back to, we might say, the original owner in the year of Jubilee. Verse 25. All your evaluation shall be according to the shekel, but not any shekel, shekel ha-kodesh, which means the temple shekel. And it had a very precise measurement that was certified. And it says 20 gerahs will be the shekel. So it has to have 20 weights of silver. It needs to weigh this measurement, which is known as a gerah. We would say gerot in plural. It has to have that many to be considered a holy shekel. Verse 26. Now we're talking about other ways to give, and this we know that there's the tithe. And what is the tithe? Well, it's the firstborn. And notice what it says here in verse 26. But the firstborn, which belongs, which is unto the Lord. So the firstborn, it is the firstborn unto the Lord. It belongs to him. Whether it be a domesticated animal, it says, this shall not be by a man set apart, sanctified, dedicated. Why? It already belongs, so he can't do anything with the firstborn. Whether it be a ox or a sheep, it says, to the Lord it is. So the firstborn is always God's. You cannot give it. It's not part of what can be offered up to God in generosity. It already belongs to him. Verse 27. And if and this would be the domesticated. We talked about this word last week. It's the Hebrew word behemah. Now, behemah relates to a cow or a goat or a sheep, some type of animal that is clean and can be offered up to the Lord. Now, notice here, we have an interesting statement, and I believe we made mention of this last week. It says in verse 27, but if in the domesticated animals, it says there's impurity. So if someone is offering up one of these animals that can be offered up unto the Lord, but now it's impure, meaning it is defiled in some way. We talked about this last week. It has a spot or a blemish. There's something wrong. It's broken one of its legs, whatever it may be. This renders this animal that was acceptable, it renders it defiled and now unable to be offered up. So it says here in this passage of Scripture, what should be done in this case? He will redeem it according to its valuation. And as we learn a redemption, he has to add 20% unto it. And if he does not redeem it, it should be sold at its normal evaluation, your evaluation. Now, what's going on here? We need to understand what's being said. If a man says, I'm giving this specific sheep unto the Lord. Sheep is a clean animal. It can be offered up to God. But upon evaluation or inspection, we see something. There is a spot. This animal is not kosher, so to speak, unto the Lord. It's a kosher animal, but it's been injured. It has a spot, a blemish, something that disqualifies it. So what should he do? Well, he should redeem it. And he should pay the valuation plus 20% to redeem it into the treasury of the Lord. Now, someone would say, well, I don't want to do that. Well, then he's free to sell it for its original evaluation. But what happens? Well, now he has to go and get another animal to do it. And we find here that in this case, he's going to have to offer up the animal. And we see here that he's not generous because he did not want to do the work of redemption. But in that case, it can be sold for its normal evaluation. Verse 28. But every devoted, this word cherem, everything that is devoted, that will be devoted by a man unto the Lord, from all which is to him, from the man or from a beast. Now, what does it mean here? Well, this is a situation where in the battle, there is victory. But God is saying these things, they must be made a cherem, that is devoted to me, meaning put to death. So we see something here in this case. It says, look again at verse 28, but all of the devoted spoils, which will be devoted by a man, meaning that he's got to put to death, from all which is to him, whether it's man or beast. And this beast is simply a domesticated animal or a field of his possession. It says, it shall not be sold, or redeemed. But everything that is devoted, we have this expression, Kodesh Kodeshim Hu L'Adonai, meaning you can't do anything with that. It has to be. Once you say it's devoted, whether I'm making that declaration or whether it's something that God has said, none of this can be set apart, devoted. Why? Again, it's like the tithe, the firstborn. It already belongs unto the Lord. Therefore, it cannot be done anything with. It has to be given up. It is treated as the Holy of Holies, meaning it is sacred unto the Lord. It cannot be sold and it cannot be redeemed. It must be offered up in this way. Verse 29. And all cherem, all these devoted things which he will devote from the human beings, meaning that it's an individual. It cannot be redeemed. This one has to die. So the implication is this. This one, he goes out to battle. They take a slave, but God says, wait, Everything is cherem. Everything has to be devoted to me. Everything has to be offered up. Everything has to be put to death, of animals, of spoils, burnt up, destroyed. And therefore, he says in this passage, this one, he must die. Look at the end of verse 29, mot yumat, he must die. Now we deal with the tithe in a unique way. Look at verse 30. We're not talking about the firstborn, but we're talking about a tithe. And it says here, every tithe of the land from the seed of the land or from the fruit of a tree is unto the Lord. It is holy unto the Lord. So it's not this same word, kodesh, kodeshim. It's simply the word kodesh. It says everything, that's the tithe, that 10%, it's holy unto the Lord. But, look at verse 31, if he will redeem it, a man from his tithe, once again, a fifth, a 20%, he will add unto it. So now, he's saying, for whatever reason, this tithe, I want to keep this particular one. Well, if he does that, he has to redeem it. That's the only way. And he's going to pay a 20% penalty to do that. Now, look at what else it says in regard to this same issue, verse 32. And every tithe of the herd, which means the cattle, or the flock, which means goats and sheep, all which pass underneath the rod. So every 10th one, in other words, the 10th one will be holy unto the Lord. And therefore he gives that to the Lord without any consideration. Why do I say that? Look at verse 33. Lo yivaker ben tov le'ra. Now, yivaker here is a word that we might say criticize. Now, criticizing involves a evaluation, a review. One is looking at it and examining it. So we see here that when it comes to the tithe, every 10th one belongs to God. You don't inspect it. You don't try to keep the good ones away from God and send the bad ones. You just let it be. Whatever the Lord gets, he gets. And this is what it's telling us. Again, verse 33. Lo yivaker. Do not evaluate, criticize between good and bad. Don't make that evaluation whether it's good or bad. And do not, and then we have the word for converting. And if this one converts it, so he wants to convert it. And notice what he says. It shall be the tumurah. Now this is important, and let me say, last week I believe that I left out a part of a verse. If you go back to verse 10 at the end, we see something very similar. Is wanting to convert something. And so he's saying, and usually convert, it's not an exchange, because if you go back to verse 10 of chapter 27, verse 10, it says, do not exchange. So this is converting. It's probably converting the value of something. So now I have something, and I have said I'm devoting this, dedicating it. I am offering up, sanctifying it unto the Lord. But now I don't want to do that. So I want to convert, meaning I want to take the value of that and give that. Well, in that case, you can do that. You ought not, but if you do, notice what he says, both in verse 10, it says, Vehayahu, meaning that thing which you wanted to convert to value, that thing that you decided you didn't want to offer, it is holy, and also what was converted, it's holy as well. Meaning you can't do anything with those two things. So what is he saying? There's no benefit. Here's what he's teaching. I have a sheep, and I want to dedicate it to the Lord, offer it up, set it apart unto him. And then I changed my mind. I don't want to do that. So I say, I'm going to convert it. I can't substitute, but I want to convert the value and then give that value. But I keep the sheep. No, you can't keep the sheep. Why? We're just told both at the end of verse 10 and also here. Now look at our verse where he says, at the end of verse 33, V'hayahu, which means the same statement, that original thing is holy, and also what was the Tamurah, the thing that was converted, that value is also holy, and it cannot be redeemed. So what that does mean, there's no benefit from that. What was original, it can't be used anymore. It can live, you can care for it, but you can't derive any benefit. Why? It's holy unto the Lord. It's the Lord's. And you better treat it like it belongs to Him. It can't be worked. It can't be eaten. It simply must be left alone, but cared for. Likewise, that which was exchanged and received, that also, that can't be used. And therefore, if you're wanting to set with that value of that one, purchase some other, that one also can't be used. It has to be given. So there's no benefit in doing that. There's no redemption. What you say must happen. Look again at verse 23. It's still within the context, I believe, of the maaser, the tithe. You just give. You don't evaluate whether it's good or bad. And you should not make a conversion of it. But if someone wants to do that, it says here, both it, meaning the original one, and what was exchanged, both are holy unto the Lord, and you can't redeem it. Let's conclude. Look at our last verse, verse 34. It says, Ele hamitzvot. Ele, these are the commandments, hamitzvot, the commandments, which the Lord commanded Moses. And then it says, two, He commanded Moses with the purpose that all of these commandments would go to the children of Israel. And where were all these commanded to the children of Israel? On Mount Sinai. So we conclude Leviticus, this study of this book, with talking about how we should want to be generous givers unto the Lord. Good advice for the people of God. And we learned that we should not ever want to profit from that which we're giving unto the Lord. It's not for the purpose of profit. It's not for the purpose of wanting to get a blessing. That's why there's no financial shenanigans that can be done in order to make a change or anything. It's for the purpose of giving freely to God, not wanting anything in response, but simply wanting to give unto Him and to give generously. It's not an obligation. It should come from within. And we all know the verse. The Lord loves a generous giver. I'll close with that. Until next week, and we begin a new book. What book will we begin? The book of Proverbs, Sefer Mishlei. Until then, Shalom from Israel.
Well, we hope you will benefit from today's message and share it with others. Please plan to join us each week at this time and on this channel for our broadcast of LoveIsrael.org. Again, to find out more about us, please visit our website, LoveIsrael.org. There you will find articles and numerous other lectures by Baruch. These teachings are in video form. You may download them or watch them in streaming video. Until next week, may the Lord bless you in our Messiah Yeshua, that is Jesus, as you walk with Him. Shalom from Israel.